I think skepticism and atheism are, which I believe are the same, are which many people disagree with. I believe are really, really important because you cannot have community, you cannot have love unless you have a shared reality. And anything that comes from within, any revelation that comes from within, by definition can't be shared. So what science did for us mostly was science gave us a reality that we could share and talk about. So if I feel the presence of my dead mother with me, that's personal, that's poetic. But if I'm going to actually talk about what death means, we have to go with things that we've proven. And proof has been given such a hard, cold kind of connotation. Whereas another way to say proof is just something you can share. It's another way to say love. If I believe there's a God in the universe and I can't prove it, I have said nothing to the community. If I think there's such a thing as black holes and I can give some evidence to that, that's a way of showing love for other people. Now, magicians are this very small, little, unimportant corner. You know, the silly people dealing with epistemology. You know, we're the ones that jokingly deal with how one ascertains truth. But for our little part, I think that showing that you can artistically deal with fantasy while in reality doing tricks is the most important lesson that human beings can learn, the difference between fantasy and reality. And whether you're taught that by the Three Stooges, who were, when I was young, the best teachers of the difference between fantasy and reality, or whether you're taught that by video games, which nowadays is how my children learn about fantasy and reality, is realizing that they can die in a video game and it's not really dying. That difference between fantasy and reality is the difference between personal space and shared space. And that line between personal space and shared space is the definition of love. So
you say the only real argument against religious terrorism is to try to share the reality of the world. How is that? You know, why is that going to stop people from blowing up buildings just a few miles from where we're
if we share reality, if we talk about things we can prove. The problem with talking about faith is you hit this wall. Why do you believe Jesus Christ is our Lord? Do you have evidence? I feel it in my heart. If you move, I feel it in my heart, out of the equation, terrorism goes away, completely goes away. You might have military events. I think my people should be free, and here's the reason why. Here's our lands that are occupied. But the idea that, you know, we're already there. I mean, this is the part that no one ever talks about. If you go to the center of the Bible Belt and you have a fundamentalist Christian judge, and all the lawyers and all the jury are fundamentalist Christians, and they believe completely with their heart, and I'm not doubting them in any way, and someone gets on the witness stand and says, I killed my whole family because God told me to. It's astonishing to me that nobody goes, well, let's look into that. You know, we have guilty, we have not guilty, we have not guilty by reason of insanity. We do not have not guilty because God told me to. And that's one of the things that I'm obsessed with in this book, is the fact that not only do I not believe, but how can that judge read the Bible and see Abraham being willing to kill his son because God told him to, see burning bushes appearing to people, hear people dropping all their worldly possessions and going on to follow.
Staying clear of linen and wool blends.
Yeah,
to Leviticus.
Exactly. What side of the tree you defecate on, and so on. How can they see all that? And then a woman who clearly believes that God told her to do something is completely and utterly dismissed.
This particular premise, God, no, you anger me.
Do I really?
Yes.
Do I really anger
You
you?
do. Because I think it's a deliberately provocative stance you take.
No, not
It's
at all.
designed to annoy and agitate people who have a sincere belief.
I don't think so at all. You won't find in this book anywhere any attacks on people. I mean, one of the things, I don't know if you've seen the Book of Mormon, Matt Stone and Trey
Yeah,
Parker,
it's brilliant.
which they describe as a love letter to religion from an atheist. And that's one of the things Matt said about it. And a lot of this talking, I've been talking to Matt and Trey for years about this. And when they did the Richard Dawkins episode of South Park, one of the things we talked about is that idea of bitterness and the idea of the anger that comes from that. And I am a huge fan of proselytizing. I am a huge fan of speaking your mind. The only way we can share the universe, the only way we can share humanity is by talking very strongly about what we believe.
You are the chief atheist out there. How did you get here? How did we get here?
Well, let me ask you, how did we get here?
I believe in this superior being, a God.
Of course.
And therefore the questions which always baffle atheists, the hard reality of life, I believe there is something greater out there. There's a greater entity, which is a spiritual being,
but what is
that allows comprehension on a scale we could never understand.
If it's a comprehension,
but if you don't believe in that superior being, what do you think happened?
If it's comprehension on a scale that we can't possibly understand, aren't you done? Why do you need to label that as something that's God or something?
Because I've never heard an atheist explain to me
a humility to saying, I don't know.
Because I never hear an atheist give me any answers to how did we get here and what happens at the end of our lives.
But the answer to something, saying we can't understand it, is not an answer.
Right, so how do you think we got here?
I don't know.
And what do you think happens when you die?
I think nothing. I think there's
Where do you go?
There's no evidence at all. Where do you go?
Where do you go?
I mean, I think
when you die, you must be terrified of death. Because that's it.
Not at all. Not even slightly.
But what do you think happens to you?
How scared are you of 1890? Does 1890 terrify you?
1890.
1890. Yeah.
What are you on about?
You weren't alive. You weren't alive then, right?
No.
You weren't alive. You didn't exist in any way.
No.
Is that a horror to you?
No.
So why is 2090 any worse than that?
I'm not horrified by any thought of dying because I believe that you go on to a celestial place, which is wonderful.
And
but for you, atheists,
where's your evidence of the celestial place?
Well, because I come back to the issue of creation.
Right.
Where do atheists?
All you have answered with the issue of creation is you've answered your answer to. My answer is I don't know, and your answer is something beyond comprehension.
Cannot write a
Aren't those
book.
the same answers? But they will stand up and they will ask, if there is no God, what stops you from raping and killing everyone you want to rape and kill? What stops you from doing that? And my answer is always, you're absolutely right. I have raped and killed every single person I want to rape and kill. And that number is 0, you evil motherfucker! It's 0! It's a goose egg! And if your number is a positive integer, sign up for prison! Get the out of our society! Because morality is more important than God, and we know that because you stupid motherfuckers say the sentence, God is good. And if morality is not more important than God, you don't get to say that. It doesn't mean anything. Unless there's some good that we believe in, some morality, then you can't say God is good. Then you just say God, whatever he does is okay. And according to the Bible, it kind of is. He does everything bad.
Did you have a particular Damascus Road experience where that became clear to you? Or is this the work of gradual rationality?
That's one of the things that's so interesting about atheism. People have epiphanies to become religious. People become religious at horrible bottom times in their life, cry out to Jesus under great stress. You don't hear that story in atheism very often. It's usually gradual. It usually comes from reading. It usually comes from discussions. It usually comes from introspection. And for me, it was being in high school and reading the Bible. I mean, I suggest to anyone who's looking for the road to atheism, just read the Bible. By the time you get to about the middle of Leviticus, you're out.
That's right. and you also might give up reading as well.
Why don't you believe in God? Well, that's a very strange question. Why don't you believe in God? Well, you came up with it. Why would I? Religion's greatest trick wasn't convincing some people that there was a God who was all-powerful. It was convincing everyone else that you couldn't ridicule that idea. We're all born atheist, you know, and then that gets changed or enhanced. I mean, there shouldn't even be a word for atheism. It shouldn't exist. Shouldn't need it. There's not a word for not believing in fairies, you know? And if people didn't keep inventing these weird, impossible deities, we wouldn't have to go around denying them. The human brain, when it's young, is a sponge. It has to be. It has to take in all the information. It has to trust its parents, its elders, to survive. Without question, don't touch the fire. Why not? Don't go near the wolf. Don't touch that spider with a red bit. Don't touch that. Why not? Just don't. There is a God. What? There is a God. And if you're bad, you go to hell. Okay? And if that's constantly confirmed, like all the other things, wolves eat you, black widows kill you, fires burn you, if it's given that same level of credence and truth, you're never going to get over it. It's going to be a lot harder to undo that. I think the myths came up, maybe, you know, often as a stopgap to knowledge until we find out more. You know, the earth is flat. No, we've proved now. Okay, the earth's not flat. We were wrong. Okay. But that's not personal. You don't take that personally. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your afterlife, you know? And so they often want to hold on to that, right? But only because of the way they've been conditioned. We know it's fun to tell children there's a Santa Claus and there's fairies at the bottom of the garden and all these cute things. It's cute till they're 7 or 8. If they're 34, it's a bit embarrassing socially. This is my son. What's he doing? He's looking for fairies. Is he? Okay, we better leave. If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. If you're born in Pakistan, you're probably a Muslim. That's a coincidence, isn't it? That you're always born into the right God. Always. Isn't that lucky? I was born into the right God. All those others are going to hell. But I was born into the right religion. I'm going to heaven. It's strange that we hold on to these sort of medieval beliefs. You know, where did the universe come from? God made it. Which doesn't solve the problem for me. Because we straight away say, well, who made God? And if they say, well, he's always been around, well, let's just say the universe has then. Let's just cut out the middleman. Dogma is the dangerous bit, and it doesn't just exist in religion. It exists in more and more places now. That cultism, that which shouldn't be questioned. Anything that, you know, that's what you want to question. If someone says you shouldn't question this, oh, you've got to question it. You've got to question it. It should be irrelevant, but it isn't, because it does infringe on people's liberties. Certainly religion, not spirituality. You know, someone believing in God, that's fine.
Harmless.
Absolutely, doesn't bother me at all. Religion isn't harmless. It's when your God starts telling you that you should kill homosexuals, and
exactly,
that's when it's not harmless anymore. Most religious people aren't crazy. It's something else. Again, it's something, you know, we worry about the people who believe the bad bits in their holy book as well as the good bits. Most nice people who believe in God, they can tell the difference. They know the nice, they cherry pick and they know the nice bits from the bad bits. They don't do the bad bits. And my point is, if you know the bad bits from the good bits, you don't need the holy book. You know, you're already a moral person. I think it's very important you challenge your own beliefs. I mean that's what science does, really. It doesn't constantly try and prove itself right. It follows the evidence, whatever that is. In fact, it tries to prove itself wrong. It doesn't sulk. When science thinks something and then it discovers it was wrong, it doesn't sulk because it found that out too. It's the question I often get, that people say, well, you're an atheist, you know, you're closed-minded. Well, no, I'm not. You know, that's a strange thing to say. I think the opposite is true. I'm going to always follow the evidence, whatever that is. And they say things like, if someone proved to you God existed, would you believe? Well, of course I would, by definition. In fact, it would be the greatest scientific discovery of all time. Scientists would celebrate. They'd run round. At the moment, we have no evidence for the existence of any God or anything supernatural. Never have. Possibly never will, but who knows? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. When someone puts forward a jar of God, we test it for its godliness, and if we find there's anything godly in it, we'll write it down. If you throw a load of coins on the floor, no one arrangement is more amazing than another. And it's sort of like they work backwards. Because this is what happened, this is what we think is perfection. So we try and we can't get around the fact that it's crazy. We've got two eyes. That's exactly where I put them. You know, these are brilliant. This is exactly. If I was making a person, I'd make it just like me. And it's hard not to think there was a will to it, but there wasn't.
You know the Mark Twain quote about, it's so great that I have ears here to hold up these things when we have glasses, and these ears are just perfect for that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And another Mark Twain.
What's particularly good about that? It's a double whammy.
Yeah.
Because he's being sarcastic about evolution and
right.
But in a strange way, people should take the analogy of the glasses, because we know those glasses were made for ears. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's strange. We know that we did that, and no one would ever go, what a coincidence.
Yeah.
I just found these weird glasses on the floor and they fit my ears. And that's what people can't get around, because they want to do that with everything. They want to do that with, you know.
Yeah.
But wasn't it great when he made bees like pollen? You know, that was a masterstroke. I'd have just had flowers and bees. He went, no, I'm going to make them need each other. Brilliant.
You are a pathological atheist, and therefore the thought of death is very final for you. And for me, it's the start of something new and glorious. For you, that's it.
For me, it's the end of something glorious. So I have to pack it all in. But, you know, I'm not depressed about it. I don't want to die any more than anyone else. And I think there's this strange myth that atheists have nothing to live for. It's the opposite. We have nothing to die for.
You have more to live for.
We have everything to live for.
Yes.
I think it's precious. I think it's beautiful. I think the world is amazing. I love people, animals, art, every hobby. I can't believe my luck that I'm alive for these 70 or 80 years. Might be less. Wait, you know, I'm not long for this world. My nan used to say that. She lived till 83. I think it was 40 years we were going, I'm not long for this world.
What are you said the things you like. What are the things that really annoy you?
Only two things really, really make my blood boil, I suppose. I suppose in general, as I get older, injustice. Injustice quietly makes my blood boil. Either personal, social, political, personal. I suppose the two main categories are religious intolerance, this arrogance that you think, you know, arguing over whose God is right, it sort of gets me down a little bit, you know. And I've got no problem with spirituality. I really haven't. You know, that's another myth. And I always try and make the difference clear between spirituality and religion. One is a very personal feeling, a journey, a hope, or whatever, a need, you know, a joy. And the other is an organised body that uses that for power and corruption in many cases. In many cases. And I don't have either, but I suppose I think that when it affects me, that's when I have a say in it. And religion affects me. Religion's very real.
So we don't need God to be good.
We don't need God to be good, and even if we did, we haven't got him.
Quite right.
So there's
what
no
matters
point.
is what's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't choose to live, but I love it.
I mean, it seems to me we could have been having this conversation 500 years ago. And life was difficult 500 years ago. There was a lot of despair. There were crops failed, and disease spread, and people suffered just instantaneous and catastrophic changes in their fortune. And it was the cause of all of this actually was well understood 500 years ago. It was witchcraft. And happily, the church had produced some very energetic men who had the gumption to deal with this problem. And so every year, some hundreds and sometimes thousands of women were burned alive for casting spells on their neighbors. Now, imagine what it would be like to be among the 5 or the 10% of people at most who recognize that the very belief in magic, the very belief in witchcraft, the very belief in good witches or bad witches was a malignant fantasy. That the white witches who were helping people with medicinal herbs and practicing midwifery, they were on no firmer ground than the black witches who were casting the evil eye. The whole belief system was at fault. Imagine the kind of criticism you're going to get. No, your problem is just with kind of fundamentalist witchcraft. The reality is that witchcraft is far more nuanced than that, and there's no conflict between science and witchcraft. I mean, science deals with physical law and physical causality, but witchcraft deals with potent spells and the internal connections between things. This idea that somehow we shouldn't call into question these patently bad ideas for fear of offending people, for fear of glossing over their despair, for fear of not criticizing other problems in the world. I would never argue that religion is the only problem in the world or the only source of human conflict, but it is a source. And we are mightily attached to it, emotionally attached to it. And we are loath to criticize it even when it is declaring its ugliest intentions and its ugliest certainties. The problem with the Bible is however you pick and choose, whether you're a literalist or a selective literalist, the problem is there's just a mountain of divisive nonsense in there, and that's where people get ideas about homosexuality being an abomination, and why our country in the 21st century debates gay marriage as though it were the great moral issue of our time. This is coming from religion, and it seems to me that it's time we had an honest conversation about that. I mean, it's not without its joys. I mean, there's some very good writing in there, and there's some rather terrifying barbarism in there that is advocated not as allegory, but as prescriptions for how to live. And I think that's undeniable. Many of these prescriptions have lost their shelf life. I mean, the Bible, on balance, tells us to keep slaves. It tells us how to keep slaves. Now, this is an embarrassment. I think a rather fatal embarrassment to anyone who would then say the Bible is the best book of moral wisdom humanity has ever had. It's not the best book because it gets the question of slavery wrong, and slavery is perhaps the easiest and one of the most consequential moral problems we've ever had to face as a civilization. But the basic point here is that, for me, that is so troubling, is that there is this claim being made by most religious people most of the time that one of their books is not an ordinary book. One of their books is a magic book. It seems to be believed that the contents of the Bible or the contents of the Quran are so impeccable, so prescient of our needs as a species that they could not possibly have been written by human beings. this is patently absurd when you read the books. I mean, just compare for a moment another human project. Isaac Newton went into isolation in the year 1665 to escape the plague. He spent 18 months working in his garret, and at the end of that time, he had invented calculus. He had invented the field of optics. He had discovered the universal law of gravitation and the laws of motion. And he came out and delivered this, and scientists in almost any field agree that this is probably the most startling use of human intelligence in the history of human intelligence. And yet no one for a moment is tempted to believe that God had to help him with this. This was not under the dictation of the Holy Spirit. In fact, we know that Newton was a thoroughly unpleasant, megalomaniacal, neurotic man. And we have superseded his insights to some significant degree, but it took 200 years of continuous ingenuity on the part of some of the smartest people who have ever lived to do this. I say this rather often. We could improve the Bible in 5 seconds, and that's problematic for the claim that it is the best book really on any subject. I have never for a moment believed, and I have never argued, that all bad things, all conflict, comes out of religion. I don't even know if most does. I think probably most wars have been fought for reasons other than religious ideology. But the larger issue is dogmatism. The larger issue is belief without sufficient evidence, belief that is intrinsically divisive because it is immune to criticism, it is immune to the normal tests of conversation, tests of reasonableness, and these beliefs that divide us into these separate moral communities where we have Christians against Muslims against Jews, or blacks against whites, or one nation against another nation based on nationalism. I think nationalism can be incredibly corrosive of everything we want to encourage in civilization. Dogmatism and ideology immune to criticism is a problem. The problem, however, is that only in religion do we put a veneer of sanctity over dogmatism and call it faith, and once called faith, it becomes a apparently necessary and redeeming and precious part of the human experience. I don't think it is, and I think we can have our ethics and have our spiritual experience, indeed even become mystics, without ever presupposing anything on insufficient evidence and without ever lying to ourselves and other human beings about what we know to be true. One of my primary concerns, whenever I criticize Islam, one of the first things I say is that nobody is suffering under Islam more than Muslims. I mean, and certainly nobody's suffering more than Muslim women. And so to obfuscate, to call it racist to criticize this faith, which has I mean, the record of religion in general in terms of the treatment of women is horrifying. I mean, the great geniuses of the Abrahamic tradition thought about the riddle of womanhood, and they gave us this cult of virginity, the forced marriages, bride burning, honor killing. I mean, it is the fact that somebody like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Somali woman who became a Dutch parliamentarian and now is arguably one of the most hunted people on this planet because of her criticism of Islam, the idea that she has to deal with a multiculturalist criticism of her insensitivity to Islam. And this is a woman who has been, circumcised is a euphemism for it, hunted, had her collaborator butchered in the street in Amsterdam, and now she is a recipient of the same kind of criticism. It is obscurantism.
Many writers dealing with this subject have talked about the dangers of religious fundamentalism, of extremism. You've talked about religious moderates.
Right.
If you could share those ideas, and I know you're interested in this topic as well.
Yes.
So,
well, an example of it, although not a particularly egregious one emerged in this conversation. I mean, the fact that you would say belief in God is not a matter of believing propositions. That is the kind of utterance one hears from religious moderates. I don't know how you would describe yourself, but you're not.
I'm a fanatic.
You're not a fanatic.
No. Not about this, though. About other.
The problem with saying that is that it effectively covers for. I mean, what you're arguing.
Right.
This is what religion should be, essentially, and yet it becomes a kind of descriptive claim. This is what religion is, and so we can slip into a mode of not acknowledging just how much mad work and how much needless human suffering is being perpetuated because of explicit propositions
so the
that
moderates
people
make
believe.
it acceptable, and you don't really realize how bad things are.
Well, one moderates want faith itself to be respected at all costs. And they want the basic project of raising children to be Jews or Muslims or Christians to be respected. And in that context, it is often very difficult to honestly evaluate just how much needless human suffering is being produced on a daily basis by religion.
When science began, the aim to achieve it was there, but we didn't know enough. Nowadays, at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, we still don't know everything, but we've achieved an enormous amount in the way of understanding. We now understand essentially how life came into being. We know that we are all cousins of all animals and plants. We know that we're descended from a common ancestor, which might have been something like bacteria. We know the process by which that came about. We don't know the details, but we understand essentially how it came about. There are still gaps in our understanding. We don't understand how the cosmos came into existence in the first place, but we're working on that. The scientific enterprise is an active seeking out of gaps in our knowledge, seeking out of ignorance, so that we can work to plug that ignorance. But religion teaches us to be satisfied with not really understanding. Every one of these difficult questions that comes up, science says, right, let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Religion says, oh, God did it. We don't need to work on it. God did it. It's as simple as that. We have no thrusting force pushing us on to try to understand. Religion stultifies the impulse to understand because religion provides a facile, easy, apparent explanation, although as we'll see later in the evening, it isn't really an explanation, and it prevents the further work on the problem.
You're talking about the improbability of all of this emerging out of the early chemistry of the Earth. I mean, don't we need an intelligent designer of some kind to do that? These are scientific claims. And it's ironic that religious people generally talk about humility, talk about the arrogance being on the side of science, and then at the drop of a hat, weigh in on scientific claims and make claims about the nature of the universe that no cosmologist can make, that no biologist can make. I mean, this is.
I have lots of cosmologists and biologists who make the identical claims that I did, but they're actually not scientific claims. They're philosophical claims.
Well, many of them are scientific. I mean, when you're talking about probabilities, when you're talking about the relationship of mind to matter, these are scientific claims, and we know that almost everything you take yourself to be as a matter of subjectivity has its basis in the brain, and we know this with one exception. I mean, I have written about this, that we have not reduced consciousness itself to brain function.
Fairly formidable exception.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge. But everything else you take yourself to be as a matter of mind, your ability to recognize faces and speak English and form concepts. I mean, people have this naive idea. When you think of yourself as a soul that may yet survive your death, you are thinking of yourself very much intact. I mean, the stories of going into the tunnel of light and recognizing grandma entail a fair amount of mentality. Mentality we know can be disrupted at the level of the brain because we see these neurological complaints all the time. And the proposition is that if you damage a brain a little bit, you destroy English and an ability to recognize faces. But if you damage it totally at death, lo and behold, the soul, still able to recognize grandma, will rise off the brain and go into a tunnel of light. These are scientific claims, and they are profoundly naive.
So you have to name for me an ethical action or an ethical statement or moral action, moral statement made or undertaken by a believer that I couldn't undertake or say, I couldn't state or do. I haven't yet had an example pointed out of that to me. In other words, that a person of faith would have an advantage by being able to call upon divine sanction. Whereas if I ask you to think of a wicked act undertaken by someone in the name of God or because of their faith, you wouldn't have, or a wicked statement made, you wouldn't have that much difficulty, I think, in coming up with an example right away. The genital mutilation community, for example, is almost exclusively religious. The suicide bombing community is almost exclusively religious. There are injunctions for genocide in the Old Testament. There are injunctions and warrants for slavery and racism in the Old Testament too. There's simply no way of deriving morality and ethics from the supernatural. When we come to the question of the absolute, well, the most often cited one is the Golden Rule, the one that almost everyone feels they have in common. The injunction not to do to others as you wouldn't want them to do to you. This doesn't, in fact, come from the Sermon on the Mount or from Christianity, or it doesn't originate with it. It's certainly adumbrated by Rabbi Hillel, a Babylonian rabbi, and it's to be found in the Analects of Confucius too. But it has, since we're talking about objective, relative, and absolute, a crucial weakness in it, unfortunately. We'd like to be able to follow it, but it's only really as good as the person who's uttering it. In other words, if I say, I won't treat you as I don't want you to treat me, what am I to do when confronted with Charles Manson? I want him treated in a way that I wouldn't want to be treated myself. Anything else would surely be completely relativistic. So the argument isn't at all advanced by saying that I couldn't know any of this. I couldn't have any moral promptings. I couldn't decide for myself if I see a pregnant woman being kicked in the stomach, that because she's pregnant, that's obviously worse than if it was just a woman who wasn't pregnant being kicked in the stomach. This is part of my patrimony as a human being. It's part of the essential emotional solidarity that I need to have with my fellow creatures to make us realize that we are brothers and sisters, one with another. We are dependent upon each other. We have duties. We have expectations of one another. And that if we didn't have these and try and fulfill them, we couldn't have got as far as we have. We couldn't have evolved as a species. We couldn't have ever had a society. There's never been a society found where rape and murder and perjury are not condemned.
Just think of how good a book would be if it were authored by the creator of the universe. I mean, there's not a single sentence in any book of the Bible that could not have been written by somebody living in the Iron Age. This is a problem for claiming that this is the best book we have. The place to put our faith is in human conversation. This is all we have to work with. And the choice is to have a truly modern 21st century conversation, availing ourselves of all of the tools and all of the wealth of human effort that is our legacy. Or we can fixate our conversation in a prior century. It can be the 7th century if you're a Muslim. It can be the 5th century BC if you're a Jew. And we can privilege a conversation that was had then among people who could barely see the wisdom of swapping out their child for a goat in a sacrifice, and dignify their claims to understanding reality with some kind of special prescience. And I think we should be very leery of doing that, given what we see about us in the name of religion.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I've recently in the United States just stated that teaching creationism is child abuse, and I think it is. Namely, if you withhold knowledge or you do anything to children that puts them at a competitive disadvantage as adults, it's child abuse. It's mild forms of child abuse, but it's like withholding medicine, withholding knowledge that later on will cause kids to become less competitive because evolution is the basis of modern biology, and teaching things that are basically lies, even if they're well-intentioned, is child abuse. I mean, it's not that people are doing this to be evil, but they're hurting their children, especially, of course, telling kids they're going to go to hell. That's definitely child abuse. It is inappropriate, and teachers not only should not be doing this, but in fact, if they are, they should be removed, in my opinion, because the purpose of education, as I've often said, is not to validate ignorance, but to overcome it.
Everything that was good, that was done anywhere at any time prior to, pick your year, was done by some religious person. I mean, there was just nobody else to do the job, right? So you could make the argument that, Catholics built every bridge in Europe until the Protestants came around and they built their half of the bridges. I mean, so there was just no one else to do the job. And we're human beings who want to pursue various ends, many of which require breakthroughs in learning. So, engineering got born in a religious context. Physics was, the first physicists were people who were Christians, who were, as is often pointed out, Newton spent half his time worrying about biblical prophecy. Now, I think that was an objective waste of his time. He also spent a lot of his time worrying about astrology, right? So you're trying to
alchemy,
yes, and alchemy. And alchemy, insofar as there was anything to it, apart from sort of the internal myth-making that may be of use to some people, edged into chemistry, right? There was often a real science at the back of a lot of merely mortal confusion where people were trying to work things out. I would argue very much under the shadow of religious commitments that they need not have had and were not actually serving their ultimate ends. And this for me is true in the moral sphere as well, because this is why the Bible, in my view, can't be the real repository of our moral wisdom in any sense, because when you go to read it, you are forced to ignore certain passages or reinterpret them rather aggressively to conform to what you now in the 21st century have every reason to believe is good or a direction worth going socially. So, it is just an inconvenient fact that slavery is endorsed in the Bible. It's explicitly endorsed in the Old Testament, and it's certainly not repudiated in the New, right? And Jesus told slaves to serve their masters and to serve their Christian masters especially well. So there's no place in the Bible where you can get a truly compelling case against slavery, because the creator of the universe clearly expected slavery to be a human institution.
Well, except for abolitionists finding enough inspiration in the Bible to use it as their main text.
But they did that despite what's in the Bible.
You have two competing theories as to how the world came into existence.
Well, I think the point is, I really object when it's two competing theories. A scientific theory is falsifiable, it's testable. God isn't testable. I can't disprove the existence of God. I can't disprove the possibility that we all were created 3 seconds ago with the memories of this delightful conversation we've had. So the point is that
we can play you back the tape later.
putting science and religion as if they're competing theories does a disservice to science, because science, you can
That's
say
not what you're hearing from me, though, is it?
Well, no, it is, because you're saying that explains the world to you. It doesn't. Christianity doesn't explain how airplanes fly or how. And the bait and switch that worried me is when you say all of this provides clear evidence that there's intelligence or design. The point is the universe behaves, but the universe, if you look at it, it behaves as if there's no purpose to the universe. Now, does that prove there's no purpose? Absolutely not. But a universe that behaves without purpose, and a universe created by God to look like a universe without purpose, well, they might as well be the same to me. It makes God irrelevant.
The fact that you and I could improve the Bible with very little thought, just by taking out, if we just took out the worst passages that have no possible redeemable content this year, or I would argue any other year, right? The Bible's already improved, right? So the fact that we could edit it to anyone's advantage is a problem for the idea that this was written by an omniscient being and not to be superseded by any human effort now or generations from now. And it's a problem not just for the Bible, it's a problem for the Quran. And this notion of revelation is what gets us there. Now, if you're going to treat all books as the product of just human minds, brilliant or not, and every shelf in the bookstore or library has the same status with respect to the merely mortal provenance of these ideas, then it's fine. Then you can pick and choose the best ideas, right? And then you can be slavishly attached to, the Plato's Republic, and that can be your favorite book. But what Revelation gets you is this notion that no, this isn't just a book, right? This is the product of omniscience on some level, and that ties your hands intellectually, because then you are forced to make these acrobatic contortions around passages which clearly have no good application now and didn't even have a good application then. And when you view it from the other side, when you think about just how good a book would be if an omniscient being wrote it, I mean, that is it's very easy to see what could be in there that would still astonish us. I mean, it's very easy to see what could be in there that would prove, just based on the time of its emergence, that this couldn't have been the product of merely human minds. And there's nothing like that in the Bible.
Harold actually asked the question, I think you were saying, did the laws of physics equally spring from nothing, fully formed into existence from nothing?
What is surprising is that the conventional wisdom right now, which could be wrong, and that's the other nice thing about science, we don't mind being wrong and changing our minds, unlike religion, but is that in fact, because of discovering that empty space has energy, it seems quite plausible that our universe may be just one universe in what could be almost an infinite number of universes. And in every universe, the laws of physics are different, and they come into existence when the universe comes into existence. So our laws of physics may become, God forbid, forgive me for saying that, could just environmental science.
Could some of those universes have gods creating them?
No, because the point is that, when people say that you need a God to create a universe, you need an intelligence to create a universe, then the key question, of course, is, well, if God is more complex than the universe, then how could God come into existence?
This is a question I very often get. It's an extremely common point of view. I agree that it's very difficult to come to an absolute definition of what's moral and what is not. We are on our own without a God, and we have to get together, sit down together, and decide what kind of society do we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where people steal, where people kill, where people don't pull their weight paying their taxes, doing that kind of thing? Do we want to live in the kind of society where everybody is out for themselves in a dog-eat-dog world? And we decide in conclave together that that's not the kind of world in which we want to live. It's difficult. There is no absolute reason why we should believe that's true. It's a moral decision which we take as individuals, and we take it collectively as a collection of individuals. If you want to get that sort of value system from religion, I want you to ask yourself, whereabouts in religion do you get it? Which religion do you get it from? They're all different. If you get it from the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, then I beg you, don't get it from your holy book, because it's, to repeat that opening line of chapter 2 of my book, the morality you will get from your holy book is hideous. Don't get it from your holy book. Don't get it from sucking up to your God. Don't get it from saying, oh, I'm terrified of going to hell, so I'd better be good. That's a very ignoble reason to be good. Instead, be good for good reasons. Be good for the reason that you've decided together with other people the society we want to live in, a decent, humane society, not one based on absolutism, not one based on holy books, and not one based on sucking up to looking over your shoulder to the divine spy camera in the sky.
There's very little in life that's worth achieving that isn't hard. Those things that are hard because most people can't do it. That's why we say they're hard. If you work at it and achieve it, and you continue that throughout your life, you are distinguishing yourself among others around you by what you have achieved. And those who rise the highest are those who keep solving hard things. Leads me to the famous quote from John Kennedy: we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy.
They are easy, but because they are hard.
Zero. Hard work dissipates ignorance.
You said you're told it, so you have to believe it. I will never require you to believe anything.
Good for you.
It will only ever be about how compelling is the evidence to you.
If you have religious faith, then whatever anyone says about the world wouldn't matter to you. If it does matter to you, then that's a different kind of contract that you're taking out on information. And that contract is, there could be data out there that would conflict with your religious philosophy, and then you'd have to go along with it. But that's not what actually happens. There's a pretense that data matters, and then they filter it, reinterpret it, ignore parts of it, slice and dice it so that it all fits in to the religious philosophy. So it requires blinders in order to make that happen.
Copernicus could not shake the idea of orbits that were perfect circles. They couldn't shake that. Why would God design a universe with a shape that wasn't geometrically perfect? So even Copernicus, putting the sun back in the middle of the known universe, had circular orbits. And since the orbits are not circles, they actually differed from predictions on the night sky. So that was a problem at the time. It's like Copernicus, this might work, but it still doesn't fit. The epicycles are doing much better. And so it wasn't instantly taken up, including the resistance, the church resistance, of course, because Earth wasn't in the middle anymore. Our counterpart to what I think you're describing is the urge to try to presume nature was perfect and then account for it with everything we know that is. I see myself as a responsible educator. And in that role, if you want to put your creation philosophies into a science classroom, I'm going to stand at the gate and prevent that. Science is about taking the unknown and figuring it out.
Right.
Intelligent design, as presented in the Dover trial, and as is widely discussed, takes what is unknown and then doesn't try to figure it out. It says we can't figure it out and ascribes it to a higher intelligence. Right. End of story. It's not science. Therefore, it does not belong in the science classroom. You want to put it somewhere, it's fine. Put it in philosophy class or history class or religion class. It's not science. You go online and in a Google search, you type God's worshipped by humans. There's a tally of all the gods ever worshipped by humans in the history of civilization. And it just goes screen after screen after screen after screen. So when you say, do you believe in God? Which God? Is it Zeus? Is it Poseidon? Is it the Jewish God? Is it the Christian God? Because the Jewish God from the Old Testament is filled with wrath and smoting and smiting and whatever the past tense verb is. And so, and the New Testament, God is kinder, all right?
A little nicer, yeah.
Yeah, all right. So you look at all of this and say, is that the God you want me to comment on? Or is there some other God? Typically, it's the Judeo-Christian blend there. In that context, I would say in my studies of the universe, I value evidence, and I don't see evidence for any kind of active intelligence or power over anything. The more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, that's not an uncommon pairing
of powers that you might ascribe to a creator, all powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth: volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go. Okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it. And this is why religions are called faiths, collectively, because you believe something in the absence of evidence. That's what it is. That's why it's called faith. Otherwise, we would call all religions evidence, but we don't, for exactly that reason. So I'm given what everyone describes to be the properties that would be expressed by an all-powerful being in the gods that they worship. I look for that in the universe and I don't find it. So I remain unconvinced. But if you've got some good evidence, bring it, bring it, bring it. Okay? And so I don't lead with that information, because what I believe should be irrelevant to anyone. It's not about me. It's about the real world.
I gotta try to use your logic back at you. But don't we define what is good and what is bad?
So we see a tsunami wipe out a whole bunch of people, and we're as human beings going, wow, that's bad, because we define what bad is. Maybe in God's brain, eyes, whatever the hell, that's not bad.
Well, but except you defined what God is.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Now you did it.
That's
so why do you have the power to define who and what God is,
right,
but not have the power to define what good is?
Yeah, my point is we just don't know it all. Not even close.
Sure. So therefore, if you're going to say God actually is good, and 250,000 people dying from an earthquake and a tsunami and other natural disasters, and God presumably has control over that, and God is good, then we have to then say God works in mysterious ways, right?
There you go.
That's that. But people only say that when their understanding of God fails them.
When
right?
it's something bad.
No, when they can't understand it, they say, well, God works in mysterious ways. But somehow, in these other ways, you did understand him.
Right.
How are you saying, well, this is the handiwork of God? Is you doing God's work? God wants you to do this. Somehow you know God's motives every other way. But when 250,000 people get wiped out, God works in mysterious ways. Why do you even claim to have access to God's mind in some contexts and not others?
Exactly.
Just admit you have no clue and get on with life. That's how I look at it. As you ascend from the earth and look at our temporal, spatial, and organizational insignificance in terms of the scale of the cosmos, if you're going to say that the same person who made the cosmos cares about your life on this earth, the bigger we know the cosmos to be, the more of an expression of hubris or ego that represents. And then you end up drifting away from the idea that the person who made the universe cares about your prayers. And so it's a plausibility argument. I wouldn't call it a scientific experiment, but in science, you always have to make a judgment as to what is sensible given the information and what is not. And the bigger is the universe, the less sensible a personal God seems. As a scientist, if you are religious and you say something that is patently, objectively false, I will tell you. I'm not going to respect your views if they're objectively false, as I owe that to your intellect to explain to you what is objectively true in the face of what you think is true, want to be true, or wish for what is true. I respect your freedom to think whatever you want, But if you're going to make a decision based on something that's objectively false, that emanates from your belief system, no matter what it is, I'm obligated, as an educator, I say, you know, that's not going to work. Or here's why it's not going to work. Well, you're advising someone else who doesn't know better. And that's not in their best interest. Yeah, I'm going to say that. It's not that religious people mess up society. That's the wrong way to look at this. The issue is dogma in any form messes up society. You can have political dogma, which is has no less guilt messing up society as religious dogma. The issue here is dogma. You fight dogma. And if it happens to be under the guise of religion, fine. But as an educated scientist, atheist, if you're going to go out there and fight religious people, you're really fighting dogma, where people want you to believe something in the absence of evidence and make that policy, make that educational curricula, make legislation based on that. That's where you have problems. And that's where you get Nazism. That's where you get the Lysenkoism. Yes. That's where you get all of these isms that have risen up, that had, some of them even had some patina of being academically derived, but when you actually part the curtains, there is dogmatic invocation of rules established by some committee of people who decide how they want you to think about all the various topics.
I agree. When
my impact would be people learn from me in a way that they are empowered by what I taught them. So that when they think of what they learned from me, they no longer think of me. They think of their own base of understanding of how this world works. And so that I become irrelevant from that exercise. And because if people say, this is true because Tyson said so, then I failed. That's not how you teach someone. That's teaching them by authority. I don't, no. I want to teach you how to think about the world, and then you say, I have a new way to understand the world, and you just run off. You don't even look back, because a new level of hunger has descended upon you, and methods and tools to feed that hunger are now accessible to you. So my impact would be that others are impacted and they don't even remember that I had something to do with it. On my tombstone, I want the epitaph, be ashamed to die until you have scored some victory for humanity. That's Horace Mann.
I can get behind that.
And a victory for humanity is not a victory for yourself. It's not statues, it's not your name, it's just humanity's better off. Any of us, I think, should want the world to be a little better off for you having lived in it. That doesn't mean people praising you, that's, no, not even about that. But what do you have to give with no expectation of return? The measure of whether you learn something is not whether it was obviously true to you upon first glance.